Okay, guys, here we're going to go and explain the refrigeration cycle. Once again, knowing how this works is going to help you troubleshoot, especially refrigeration issues, um, such as low freon, um, clogs in the system. So we're going to go ahead and cover this. Now, there's four main components: a compressor, condenser, expansion valve, and the evaporator. So we're going to go and start here with the compressor, which is the heart of the system. It's the pump that pumps that freon just in one cycle. Um, so it's going to come out of the compressor, a hot gas, and go through the condenser, which is outside. And as a matter of fact, the compressor and the condenser are both the outside unit. Um, and we're going to go ahead and do a live demonstration of the actual components here in a little bit. But the compressor compresses the freon. It's the technical term is refrigerant. Freon is just a brand name that's kind of caught on out there. But it's going to compress the refrigerant into a hot gas, enters the condenser, and this is where all the heat is expelled from the condenser through the fan motor that you see out there. And then it comes out of the condenser a hot liquid and enters the expansion valve, which is inside the evaporator coil. So these two are together in one unit, and these are together in one unit. So that hot liquid enters the expansion valve and goes through a process that's called flashing. So it takes that hot liquid and it sprays it into a cold gas liquid mixture. And then that cold freon, the cold refrigerant, goes through the evaporator coil and exits a cold gas, which then enters the compressor, and that compressor compresses that gas into that cold gas into a hot gas. Now, when the air is from the blower motor on the furnace, when that turns on and the air is running through the evaporator, that freon in the evaporator is picking up all the heat from the air. So as it goes through the bottom, through the coil, that air is warm. As it exits the top of that coil, the air is colder because the heat has been absorbed by the freon. So it's kind of neat how that works. And then that heat is in this cold vapor gas, and it's compressed into a hot gas, which enters the condenser, and then that's where the heat from the home is released and blown out the top of that fan that you see out there. So that heat that you feel, that's actually the heat that's coming from the inside of your home. And let me see if I can get to this next slide. Which this is kind of a different breakdown of it. So again, got the four components: compressor, evaporator, expansion valve, condenser. Again, for the foremost, or the four main components. Comes out of the compressor a hot liquid, and this represents a condenser coil, and this is that hot air that is expelled. So again, that hot gas goes through the expansion valve, otherwise known as a metering valve or metering device. Now, it could be an expansion valve, it could be just a little piston. The newer stuff will have the expansion valves. The older stuff, the older units, would have just a little piston. I'm going to show that to you also. And then it goes through the evaporator, a cold gas liquid vapor. Now, by the time it gets up to the end, it's going to be all gas. Here, you got a little liquid, but then as that heat is being absorbed, it'll turn into a vapor. And then here's where the blower fan blows out the cold air, and then it goes into the compressor, which goes in there as a cold liquid, or I'm sorry, vapor, and then comes out a hot liquid. So it just continues that cycle as the system is running. And we're going to go ahead and get into the physical locations of these so that you can see what they are, what they physically look like. So we'll do that now. All right, guys, we're going to cover the condenser and the components, the major components, the main components, and we'll get into some of the other components on next videos, how to troubleshoot those. But we're just going to show you the main components. This is called a condenser. Now, just a quick sidebar, this is the power disconnect. So whenever you're working on condenser changing components, you're going to definitely want to take that disconnect out, and then you're going to want to check for voltage. Behind here is contactor, capacitor, and like I said, we're going to cover troubleshooting on those. But here is your discharge line, otherwise known as high side, and the bigger one is your suction or the low side. So the Freon comes in from the evaporator coil, and by the way, these are service valves where you can shut them down and isolate the Freon into the unit, into the condenser. But your suction line is going to come, the Freon is going to flow this way into the compressor. And let me show you that compressor. I'm going to pull this off. I already took the screws out. But here's your fan motor, your condenser fan motor. And when that turns on, that's what disperses the heat. It draws the air from the sides and takes that heat and blows it out the top. So this is your fan blade, condenser fan motor. But here's your compressor. And again, that's the pump. And that's what's pumping the Freon, compressing it. And here's the suction line, comes inside, and the valves will compress that gas into a hot gas on the high side, and it'll go through the coils, and these are called spine fin coils, the condenser coil. But you'll have that hot liquid and vapor into this, and that's where the heat from the house is being transferred from the house into these coils, and then the fan just takes that heat and just blows it up the top, out the top. So it'll bring it in, compress, comes out through the coils, and then it goes back through the high side and then back to the evaporator coil. And again, it just makes a big loop and it just keeps pumping that Freon. So I wanted to show you the major components of that. And we're going to cover troubleshooting of the compressor. And these here are pressure switches, and you have one on the high side. So for example, what will happen, and these are connected to the contactor inside, and we'll show you that after a while. But these are if the pressure gets too high, so for example, if the fan motor goes out or seizes, it's not able to get rid of that heat, and the pressure is just going to rise and rise and rise because it's not getting rid of that heat. And this will open. It's a safety device for the compressor to protect the compressor. Same thing on the low side, the suction side. If you form a leak and your Freon leaks out, then the pressure will drop, that switch will open, disconnecting power to the contactor, and again, that prevents the compressor from running without any refrigerant, because that'll damage the compressor as well. So these are the components of the condenser, and we'll be going inside and showing you the evaporator coil and the TXV, and we'll see you in that video. Okay guys, here we have the evaporator coil, and it's usually going to sit right on top of the furnace, unless the furnace is a downflow, at which case it would go ahead and sit under the furnace. But in this case, in this scenario, and the majority of them would be an upflow situation. So this is an upflow coil. Here we have our line set, and again, the small one is what's called the discharge or the high side, and the refrigerant will flow this way, as you can see on the filter dryer, the arrow, and the filter dryer will take out any contaminants, moisture. It just kind of keeps the refrigerant clean, and it goes in here. And let's go ahead and take this cover off. Okay, so right here is our expansion valve. Now this is what's going to meter and flash the Freon. So again, it comes in through the small tube and comes into here, and then it'll spray it into a cold mist liquid combination, mostly a vapor. It'll go through these feeder tubes and into your coil, and it'll transfer and go all the way through the coil, and then it exits the evaporator coil through the big line, which is called the suction line or the low side. So it'll be a high pressure liquid on the high side, and then when it gets through and coming out of the evaporator, that's going to be a low pressure vapor. Okay, so, and that's what the function of this expansion valve is for. And behind these plates, you'll see the underbelly of the coil, and that is where the fan of the furnace, the blower fan, will blow that air up through it. So it enters the bottom, warm air, and as it flows across the coil, the Freon in the coil is absorbing the heat from the air. So when that air exits, a lot of heat has been taken out, and that's the coolness that you feel through the ducts and through the return or the supply registers. And that heat is then taken on the low side back to the compressor, and it just keeps pumping it all back, back and forth, back and forth. So you'll either have an expansion valve, or you could have a piston. And you can see how small this orifice is, and that high liquid will flow into there and come out the other side. It'll just spray it into a cold vapor, and you'll have a little bit of liquid, but by the time it gets through the coil, that liquid will be evaporated. It'll be just vapor. So you can either have a TXV or a piston, and these are the main components of an air conditioning system. And then you have your drain line for the condensation, and we're going to go into more detail on cleaning the coil. We'll have videos for that, but yeah, just showing you the refrigeration cycle and the physical locations of everything. So we'll see you on the next video.